B'Shem Hashem Na'aseh v'Natzliach. There is a interesting question that countless people deal with every day in Am Yisrael, but don't really know how to deal with it, and many times make mistakes when it comes to it. Not because of just lack of knowledge, but also because we allow our emotions to get the best of us. So, if somebody told you to eat kosher, you would understand it logically that kosher animals are different than non-kosher animals. You'd understand logically that kosher slaughter is very different than the non-kosher killing. You'd understand it logically that the animals are prepared differently, and therefore you rationalize and agree, okay, I'll eat kosher. If somebody told you you're forbidden to be with your wife during a period of the month when she's Niddah, you'd understand logically this is not a appropriate period to be together. No problem. But if somebody told you that if your wife is sick while she's Niddah, because she just had a surgery of some kind, or perhaps she just gave birth and she's automatically Niddah, and you're not allowed to help her. You're not allowed to hand her any medicine. You're not allowed to pick her up. You're not allowed to assist her in walking. You're not allowed. This immediately touches the heart of people and makes it very, very difficult for them to handle and to do unless they are well aware of the halacha and the magnitude of it and what it actually means. So today we're going to answer that question, Be'ezrat Hashem, of what is really the bottom line here. Is a husband allowed to touch his wife to help her due to, while she's sick, when she's Niddah? Again, if is a husband allowed to touch his wife in order to help her because she's sick, yet she's Niddah? So the Trumat edition in Siman 242 says that husband is not allowed to touch his wife to help her while she's Niddah, even if she's sick, because the husband is healthy while the wife is sick, and therefore touching her can entice her or him to start trying to be intimate with each other. And the sin of being intimate while she's Niddah is so grave that we can't even take the risk of the husband touching his wife to help her walk and stand and so on and so forth. That's what Trumat edition says. Now the Mordechai, in the first perek of commentary on Masechet Shabbat, in Siman 237, section 5, he quotes Rabbi Tuvia of Brona, and he says that those who refrain from helping their wives when they're Niddah are practicing Chassidut of drunkards, meaning that your wife is sick and she happens to be Niddah at the same time, go help her anyway. Stop refraining from it. You're acting like too stringent. You're crazy. In so many, in our language today. So you have here a machloket, a completely different opinion between two giant chachamim. How could it be? One says completely forbidden, and the other one says if you are refraining, you're like a drunk person. And these are sages from 1,000 years ago. It's not from today, or people are full of confusion. So Rabbi Yosef Karo in the Bet Yosef brings the Trumat edition, who says that it's forbidden, and he adds to it that the Ramban in 127, page 127, Nachmanides, also forbids the husband to touch his wife when she's ill, but specifically forbids a husband to check the heartbeat of his sick wife when she's Niddah. And this was when there was no such thing as pikuach nefesh, meaning that she was sick while she was Niddah, but there wasn't life risk, there wasn't pikuach nefesh. But if there was pikuach nefesh, if there was a life risk for his wife, then the Ramban, the Nachmanides, was lenient and allowed the husband to touch her, meaning in order to help her walk and do whatever she needs to do, hand her medicine and so on. But the Bet Yosef continues and says, but when it comes to the Rambam, Maimonides, it looks like he doesn't even make a leniency, even if there is pikuach nefesh. Meaning the Rambam was so stringent on this specific issue, according to the Bet Yosef, that even if there was life risk, the Rambam says it's still forbidden for him to touch her. Because the Rambam is looking at the issue here very differently, according to Rabbi Yosef Karo, his understanding, where he says that the Nachmanides is looking at the husband touching the wife is getting close to the sin of immorality, arayot. And based on the Ramban's understanding, this is a rabbinical law. And therefore, when it comes to rabbinical laws, there's no need to be stringent. And this is a place where you would want to be lenient. And that's why the Ramban, the Nachmanides, paskins that it's if there's an issue of pikuach nefesh, of life risk, then you should be lenient and help your wife. But the Rambam, on the other hand, Maimonides, he says that touching a woman that's Niddah is actually a biblical sin. And therefore, it's in a level of Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayot, and Shfichut Damim. These are the three cardinal sins. Avodah Zarah meaning idol worship, Gilui Arayot, which is immorality, and Shfichut Damim is murder. These are three cardinal sins. The Torah tells us it's better to die and not make those sins. Meaning, if somebody put a gun to a person's head, chas v'shalom, and told him either go worship JCPenney, or go kill somebody, or go be intimate with a woman that's forbidden to you, a person must die. He's not allowed to make those sins. So the Rambam looks at someone touching a Niddah as a biblical sin of in a level of Gilui Arayot, of immorality, and therefore it's better that he die and not touch his wife and while she's Niddah. So it's definitely a place to be stringent. Now, the Shach comes later in Siman 195, Seif Katan 20, and he also brings the Bet Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Karo's opinion of the Rambam, and his Bet Yosef's understanding of the Rambam, saying that it's a biblical sin, but he disagrees with the Bet Yosef. Why? How could he disagree? If he's bringing the Rambam, the same Rambam that the Bet Yosef brought, how could he disagree with him? He's saying, the Shach says that he disagrees with the Bet Yosef because he's saying that the Rambam was referring to a wife that was ill, but rather that the husband was touching her in a lustrous way, meaning he wasn't touching her to help her. He was touching her for other reasons. So that's why the Rambam forbid it. But if the talking about a life risk where there's no issue of lustrous, he says that the Rambam surely would allow it. And therefore the Shach says that the Rambam would surely allow a husband to touch his wife for the sake of medical help. So here we see that what we've gotten so far is there is a doubt in regards to the opinion of the Rambam, and there's a doubt in regards to the opinion, a safek, in regards to the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch. And there's also a clarifying idea by the Shach. So what's the actual halacha? What is the bottom line here? Rabbi Chaim Palaji, in his Sefer Ruach Chaim, in Yoreh De'ah, Siman 195, Seif Katan 7. He writes, I was asked if one's wife, who's at the time Niddah, was also ill, was also sick, and was given medicine by a doctor, and at a time that she doesn't have fever, meaning that there's no life risk here, but she has to take this medicine. Is it permitted by her husband to check her pulse via her chest? That's how they used to check the pulse, in order to make sure that she's not feverish, or to give her the medicine, from his hand to her hand. That's what Rabbi Chaim Palaji says. He was asked, if a wife that's Niddah is sick, and but not at a stage of life risk, is she allowed to accept medicine directly from a husband, or is a husband allowed to check her pulse? So Rabbi Chaim Paladi says the following. That's the answer. He says, if the husband has the ability to get his wife a nurse or any type of female helper, then it's forbidden for him to touch her based on the psak of the Trumat Adeshin, first one that we mentioned. Trumat Adeshin was stringent about it, says you're not allowed to touch your wife. He says if he has the ability to get her a nurse, then he's forbidden from touching her, and he has to get her a nurse. And also the same, he also quotes the Bet Yosef. But if he doesn't have the ability to get her a nurse because he can't afford it, or he's at a place where it's not possible to get her help, then you can rely on the sages who are more lenient at the hour of urgency, Shat Dachak, as the Rama wrote. So here the Rabbi Chaim Palagi writes that, if he's able to afford a helper, he has to get her helper, and he's not allowed to touch her. If he can't afford a helper or he can't get a helper, then if there's urgency here, he could help his wife. Then comes Rav Ovadia. Rav Ovadia, Alav Shalom, in Sefer Taharat Habayit, in Chelik Bet, Siman Bet, Seif 46. He writes, if a wife is ill while she's Niddah, the husband is forbidden to touch her or to help her stand or even walk, even if she doesn't have anybody else to help her, because he's healthy, and it's possible that the Yetzer Hara will entice them to sin. So he must get her a nurse to take care of her as it's appropriate. So here, the Rav Ovadia, first part of Rav Ovadia, he's in essence quoting the Trumat Adeshin. He's saying that the person is forbidden from touching his wife, but even more so, he's saying that even if there is nobody else to help her, because of the fear that they'll sin, because this is such a big sin. But in a situation, Rav Ovadia continues, in a situation where there is danger, that if he doesn't help her, there could be a life risk, then there's room to be lenient, because such touching, when there's danger, is not possible to be lustrous. Meaning, as the Shach says, this is in what he's saying here. He's saying that, if there is a danger, a life risk, where the husband, he's not thinking about lustrous things, so surely you could be lenient, and the husband can help her. Now, a woman that's a Niddah and ill at the same time, but also is in danger, there's a pikuach nefesh, and the doctor said to put specific medical cream on her, and there's no one else other than a husband to do it. It's written in the Meshiv Halacha, section 1, first chapter, section 50, that you have to be lenient and allow it to happen. Meaning, in the first section, Ovadia says, when there's no issue of pikuach nefesh, when there's no issue of life risk, even if there's no help, he's not allowed to touch her. But if there is a life risk, then there is room to be lenient. The second section is saying that if there is life risk, then again, you have to be lenient if there's nobody else to help her. So what's the total conclusion? What's the bottom line that everybody's been waiting for? A couple of major points. According to everyone, all of the poskim, anytime a husband can afford to bring a helper, a nurse, or somebody to help his wife, then he must bring her the helper, and he's forbidden from touching her, because he can get somebody else to do it. Therefore, there's no permission for him to do it. But if there is life risk, then there's leniency. But if there is no danger, if there's no danger, then there's leniency. If there is life risk, then it is allowed. Then it's allowed. Again, I'll conclude it again just in case I misworded it. It's 5 o'clock in the morning right now. Everyone agrees that any time the husband can afford to bring a helper, can afford to bring a professional helper or even a friend or whatever it is, another female that can help his wife, then he must. And if he can't afford one, he can't afford to bring a helper, but there's no danger, there's no life risk, then it's not allowed. But if there is life risk, then it's allowed. So here we see that everyone agrees to bring the helper, but if the husband is stingy and he doesn't want to pay a helper to come, or he hates his wife, or he's just a crazy person, then he needs to know that he's still forbidden from touching her. Why? Because you can get somebody else to do it. But if there is a life risk, then he can actually do it himself. So that's the bottom line. A person needs to know, if your wife just gave birth, you have to get her a helper. Today, Baruch Hashem, it's not so hard to get a helper, whether professional or family. Usually the mother of the wife is more than happy to help. Sometimes the mother of the husband, sometimes both, sometimes a good friend or a sibling, whatever it is, get somebody to help. Don't play with fire. Why? Because we see here from the poskim, even though there's different opinions here, we see here from the poskim that they all agree that this is fire. You can't play with this. You can't play with this to such an extent that some of the poskim says that even if there's a life risk, you shouldn't touch her. So a person needs to know that touching your wife when she's niddah, it's a very, very big deal. Needless to say, when she's not ill, meaning if she's ill, it's already a big deal, and many poskim say you're not allowed to touch her anyway. But you should understand from this that when she's not ill and she's niddah, you're completely forbidden from touching her. You're not allowed to sleep in the same bed. You're not allowed to hand each other the children. You're not allowed to hand each other anything. Why? Because she's niddah. And Hashem wanted to make sure that we understand that during that time, you're supposed to get spiritually connected to your wife. Talk to her, learn Shurei Torah with her. No problem. That's fantastic. But as far as touching, as far as sleeping in the same bed, as far as sitting right next to each other on a couch, things like that, you're playing with fire. Not just regular fire, but lava. So hopefully this Shiur Halacha gave you some more understanding of Da'at Torah when it comes to this particular issue, and will help us, B'ezrat Hashem, get closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu by removing ourselves from any dangers of sins and getting ourselves closer and closer to the mitzvot that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us all to fulfill. Chazakim u'buchim, may Hashem bless you, and Shabbat Shalom.